Thank you so much for joining this event. I called it Back to the Future because I do believe we need to look back in order to see perhaps a better future, an alternative future. And how do we get there? Well, it doesn't depend on myself alone. It really depends on all our action, I would say. I want to use this opportunity of having turned 60 to look back a little bit. Not everything was a success, but there are also some funny pictures, like this one, for example. For this, for that one. Who remembers this? Out of the box meeting. Another picture. One more. Anyway, just a little memory of the past. This event is being supported by the European Commission through an ERC project that's called COSI, Co-Evolving City Life. But the message I have today is not purely scientific, it's a personal message actually. So I do think it's time to look back, to see the better future ahead. In view of wars, pandemics, environmental and financial crisis, our future is broken. And that's why we run this workshop to learn how to get back to the future. Many of you may remember the Future ICT project, actually. That was back in the years 2010, 11, 12, when we prepared that together, but how did it come about? I was invited, that was back in the year 2008 even, to this OECD Global Science Forum on Complexity Science for Public Policy. And that was basically at the time when the financial crisis was at the horizon. As a complexity scientist, I saw, of course, what would be potentially ahead of us, that there would be cascading effects that would make things 100 times worse or so. This is a nice video of the group of Frank Schweitzer. Thank you very much. At that time, we said we really need to address the grand challenges of humanity on this planet. We had this impression that we knew more about the universe and its stars than about what was going on planet Earth. And that was wrong. There were so many problems unsolved. And there was science emerging that could address this kind of problems. We were, at that time, this is an old slide, already pointing out that we would face financial, economic, and debt crisis, social and political instabilities, environmental and climate change, organized crime, cybercrime, quick spreading of emerging diseases. And these were new kinds of problems that are accelerating based on interactions in complex network systems. Okay, so basically, we were committed, really. We wanted to basically decomplexify the system, to understand what was going on, to understand what could be done. And I was pushed somehow to write a proposal for a support action. I was by a Visioneer project. Stefano Balietti actually then has worked out 4 white papers with me. And that was the basis, the ideas, the framework of what was about to come. Shortly later, the European Fed flagship program was announced. Europe promised to put 2 billion euros on the table for 2 projects, 1 billion each. And we were pushed to apply for that money. At that time, we had the impression they would really put the money there and they would pay for the research. A couple of months later, they said, but you will have to basically come up with 50% of the budget yourself. So before we imagined we would be kind of collected billionaires, After that, we basically had $500 million of debts, before everything began. Nevertheless, we were very successful in raising interest for this project in various countries, among many companies. Letters of support were coming in, I would say, by the dozens, almost, I think it was more than 100 even. We did not prepare these letters. It was their words. Everyone was sending a different letter. They were really motivated. They wanted to be on board. And so we wanted to build, among others, a planetary nervous system that would feed a living Earth simulator. And the global participatory platform would basically open up the potential of all that for everyone. That was the idea. And the idea was found to be a great idea. We were mentioned as one of the projects among the 10 world-changing ideas in Scientific American. Actually, it was the #1 project mentioned. And not only the United States was interested in that project, but also China, Japan, Russia, and many other countries. And then this happened. Future ICT didn't get the money. And of course, being a scientist, we all know that not every project can be funded, and that's a okay thing in principle. It was promised, however, that there would be no political interference. United States really wanted to have a future ICT program. There's this article, as you can see over here, bringing ICT, complexity science, and social science together to create socially adaptive, self-organized ICT systems. But then something else happened. Global surveillance and control systems were built, violating human rights, lacking privacy protection, lacking democracy, lacking complexity science, lacking ethics, all supposedly to save humanity. That means us. And a bunch of new societal models were invented, all surveillance-based, data-driven, AI-controlled cybernetic societies. Some call them Big Brother society, Big Mother, Big Other, Big whatever society. So it's really more than enough surveillance societies that have been invented. Unfortunately, very little money was invested into digital democracy. So the question is, has a multi-headed beast been created? No matter what you think about it, we're certainly living in a time of big data. That data now goes through AI systems that learn on the data. We have an explosion of AI. Some people think that we would see super intelligence in the near future, if it hasn't happened yet, like unknown to the public. Ray Kurzweil, for example, even expects that by 2050, approximately, we would be able to simulate the intelligence of all human brains on this planet. I'm not sure how many will be left by that time. Anyway, you don't have to believe that. Perhaps it's never going to happen. But in any case, what we can say for sure is that there are people who are thinking about data-driven AI-controlled societies, and that one is working on operating systems, not just for smartphones, for computers, but for the entire planet. And that is something that we have to be a lot more aware about. The idea goes back to at least 1948. Idea of cybernetic societies, where basically everything would be controlled through information. There's even this book about the human use of human beings, cybernetics in society. At that time, they couldn't build it. By now, it's reality. But which kind of reality? That's the question. I'd like to share a memory with you. In one of the meetings preparing for the FED flagships, there was a talk entitled "A Matrix Reloaded." a woman dressed up in a red dress was talking about this subject. And this is probably what, or perhaps what they've built. And how does it work? You may remember the book Nudge. It came out in the year 2007 or 8. Richard Thaler, now a Nobel Prize winner, Cass Sunstein, equally more or less in scientific impact, not a Nobel Prize winner. He got worried about what was being done with manipulation. Nudging is basically trying to influence people in their behavior, their decision-making through little information tailored to the situation. It's called liberal paternalism. But then the same Richard Thaler has published this book, and see at this book title, it shows supposedly a swarm of birds, says misbehaving. There's a little gap in this swarm, and there's a bird shown in red that's kind of falling out of place. Obviously, the title suggests that shouldn't be, and this needs to be fixed. Now, this was the time where Cass Sunstein got worried, and he wrote this book about the ethics of influence, and perhaps that ruined his Nobel Prize. I should say, and you probably know, I mean, the complexity scientists among you for sure, that what we see on the left-hand side is not a bird flock. A flock of birds looks very differently. It's not a crystal. It's not a totalitarian order. It's self-organized. There's no one bird that leads the swarm. So we can basically see which way things were going. But not many people have paid attention. But there were some warning sounds as well. And one of those examples that people have often presented was, okay, so people want to be healthy, how to help them to be healthy. Basically, if there's a choice between a chocolate muffin and an apple, then you should basically put the apple a little bit closer, so you would nudge the person to take the apple. Sounds very harmless, right? But we know another case in human history where things have gone pretty wrong. At that time, it was clear to me already that if you would subconsciously try to manipulate the thinking, feelings, decisions and actions of people, we would lose our freedom, we would lose our self-determination, we might lose human dignity, democracy, many things that we've built over hundreds of years. I have publicly warned in many places in front of politicians, business people, scientists, religious people, whatever. So they knew. I've spoken even to the Bundestag about it. I've warned of social climate change by social bots, something that has surely happened in the meantime if you think of hate speech. I've also warned in Villa Hammerschmidt at an event. This is the official residence of one of the two, of the Bundespräsident, the highest politician in Germany. And I've warned that we may be seeing a kind of data-driven fascism on its way. Mass surveillance, unethical experiments, social engineering, propaganda, censorship, and a lot of other things, including forced conformity, and so on and so on. Besides this, the question, of course, was obvious: who would be in control? Right? Who would nudge you? And of course, everyone would want to have this remote control. The Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, Google, Apple, whatever, you know. And how it would end, I think everyone could also conclude at that time, it would be ending in cognitive warfare. And this is what we have. It's part of the hybrid warfare that is currently taking place worldwide. A non-declared war, but it's still a war, because cognitive warfare is one of the official war disciplines besides land, water, air, space, digital. It's cognitive. That means your mind is now the battlefield for all the powers in the world. And it was rolled out, despite the warnings. There were brochures suggesting we could govern more effectively. Later on, Tristan Harris has explained us how it works. He'd worked in a Google control room for some time, and in his TED talk, he explained how a handful of tech companies controls billions of minds every day. And it has also been noticed by many that some of those big IT companies have something that looks like imperial ambitions. And the idea came up that we could now create something like a data-driven, AI-controlled benevolent dictator. So if you would have data about everything, we could see the truth, and we would just have to do what the data tells us, and that would be the perfect world, paradise on earth, basically. That is what was promised. And we've ended up in hell. So what went wrong? The idea was really, for some time, that we could fix the world from a control room that has access to all that data. That was the NSA dream, but certainly not only over there. The military has been working on a prediction machine. They want a predictable future. A predictable future needs a controllable future, and controllable future needs to control people's decisions. Otherwise, they would mess up the plan. So they have created something like a digital crystal ball, and they were believing with this, they could save the world if they just got hold of that technology. But in order to make good use of it, you need other things as well, such as ethics, not just all the power in the world. So what happened is a sorcerer-apprentice effect. It did not end well. And perhaps one of the milestones on the way was that Obama had to give up on control over the internet. It was given to ECAN, an international organization. And at that time, he seemed to know what would happen. In the last correspondence dinner speech, he said, this is also a time around the world when some of the fundamental ideals of liberal democracies are under attack. And when notions of objectivity and of a free press and of facts and of evidence are trying to be undermined, in some cases ignored entirely. This is something that scientists who care about facts should worry about. This was also about the time when the fact-free world, the post-factual era started. Because basically what became possible was to personalize web links. If you and I click the same web link, it doesn't mean that we would see the same content. And with this, of course, you can do a lot of manipulation. So I want to show you how information flows are being personalized, manipulated with some real examples. You all know, of course, when you book a flight or a hotel, you would see personalized prices. Right? So there's personalization going on websites. There's nothing I assume that you have known about before. But when you and I search for something, these search engines would mostly give us different results. Different order, some results would not show up at all. And as we pay most attention to the first entries, there's a search engine manipulation effect. And that can be used to manipulate your attention, your thinking, your feelings, even your voting behavior at elections. And that is something that has actually been tried many times with more or less success. And we've learned about this through the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And that happened because somehow military propaganda, personalized propaganda, was becoming a mainstream approach in the advertisement world. And as a result, as we know from some revelations, because some insiders have spoken up about it, democratic elections in democracies have been manipulated in more than 65 countries for many years. That means for probably more than a decade, we have not had free, anonymous, and fair elections. I mean, democracy is fundamentally damaged. Steinmeier, the German president, has pointed out publicly this deadly danger to democracy. We have been pointing out before. I mean, we launched the debate to some extent, at least. We have published this Spektrum of the Wissenschaft piece, Digitale Demokratie statt Datendiktatur, digital democracy rather than data dictatorship, called it the Digital Manifesto. And it took more than a year for Scientific American, the mother journal, to publish the English translation that we had already 1 week later. So it was delayed because they assumed it would make a big splash. And in fact, there were quite some angry people. But it came even worse. Not only have your consumption choices, your feelings, your thinking about the world being manipulated in the elections, in the end, it really hit national security. I mean, from the point of view of the military, that's the worst thing that can happen, right? Because with all that personal data, you know too much about people, including politicians, including military people, and you can use it to manipulate everyone, including politicians. We always pointed out it would be the wrong way to go, and we had a plan B, we had a plan C and plan D. We were working on alternative and better futures and alternative proposals. So we were never entirely sure whether politics would really stay out of the flagship decision, and so we have been working on alternative proposals. And they have not been turned down by reviewers or reviewer boards. Instead, what happened is kind of the entire organizations were taken down. So, for example, and I may remember this, we've written this proposal to Euroforce. It got all the points it needed to be supported for implementation, but then at that time when it should happen, basically they had closed down Euroforce altogether. Then there was another proposal, Sonderforschungsbereich, or a huge research, collaborative research activity between Switzerland and Germany. It was supposed to be about extreme natural events. We did have already the review date where we would have had to defend the proposal, but that was cancelled, and there was never again a review and defense date. So basically, it was just put into the waste basket. Then was 7 years later, after the first Fed flagship call, there was a second one. And we were participating again, this time with human AI. The proposal got 15 of 15 points, was selected as a Fed flagship, the date for the public announcement was already set, and then the entire flagship program was cancelled. It says 6 candidate research proposals lost in limbo. So kind of hundreds, if not thousands of scientists have been working in vain for years. You know, cannot be good for progress in Europe. And also, when it comes to publication, their visibility, I have made a very disturbing observation that not everyone could access those publications. I've made a little non-representative questionnaire on Twitter, and I was very much surprised to figure out that some people could access the paper and others could not. Actually, the majority could not. This was about democracy, so why was it not accessible? Now, this is actually, I would say, even part of a pattern, because a lot of those things that I've published in the past, in particular in newspapers, is not available anymore. I mean, people always say the internet doesn't forget anything, but this article, for example, you won't find. That article you won't find if you don't pay attention, will lose our self-determination and rights. That article you won't find, it's Google's choice. I mean, this was a warning before actually Brexit happened. Or this article, The Fall of the Giants, you will not find. Or that article, which funny enough appeared in Credit Suisse Global Investor, Why We Need Democracy 2.0 and Capitalism 2.0 to Survive. You will not find that anymore. This entire journal was ended after this edition. It was about value-sensitive design, basically. Despite all this, many things that Future ICT wanted to do actually did happen. And of course, it's not just my merit to do. It's because many people have been pursuing those ideas and made their projects. And that this did happen to the extent, perhaps was however related that, to the fact that we published that collection of white papers. So the ideas were out there, everyone could access them. And now we have basically not only agent-based simulation, but as somehow suggested some years ago, we have AI agents. You see those different working areas of Future ICT over here. Much of it has happened elsewhere, in many cases. Data science, there's even a journal that Frank Schweitzer has been establishing. Exploratories, computational social science is on the rise. Global systems science, innovation accelerator, planetary nervous system, living Earth simulator, all of that somewhere has happened. Where we're lagging behind is basically, when it comes to the global participatory platform, I mean, opening up data and code for everyone, open innovation, and all of this kind of fair opportunities and benefits of everyone with the data created from us. That hasn't happened yet. A social inspired ICT, it's coming. Ethical ICT, that was a hard one. And I should say, what really helped was the PhD program that was established in Delft. That was published in The Economist. So it got noticed that suddenly TU Delft was planning to make a big investment, that's about 2 million euros, I think, into a PhD program with 10 PhD students. And so many places saw, oh, if they do it, we have to do it as well. And so ethics was on the rise. And by now, I would say ethics is perhaps the sharpest sword in the battle for our future. This is a synopsis of the PhD program in Delft. At some point, the White House was sending signals that they were preparing for a responsible future with artificial intelligence. And with the publication of this English translation, also further activities were triggered, including activities on ethically aligned design, ethics standards. Even the World Economic Forum has reported about how we can engineer a more responsible digital future. And after many years, the godfather of AI, now also Nobel Prize winner, has started to warn about abuses and accidents and dangers connected to AI. We have, of course, pointed out that AI would have to be used not just for automation. Thinking of smart cities, for example, we would need to design for self-organization. And that is something that hasn't happened. In fact, AI in many cases is really very bad at extracting features of complex systems. Take the game of life. It's based on 3 very simple rules. If you feed the data created by those rules into a machine learning system, of course it will learn to approximate those patterns. Perhaps with millions or billions of parameters, but it would have difficulties finding the 3 rules that created those data. So it's an asymmetric problem. It's easy to produce complexity, but it's not always easy to figure out what's going on. So what has been forgotten in all of the AI hype is basically that there are complex dynamical systems that cannot be easily learned by AI systems today, and that we don't want to turn into machines. These are self-organizing systems. Among the self-organizing systems is our brain, our health, our body, ecosystems, our society, markets, the economy, almost everything that matters has a good deal, if not most deal, of self-organization in it. So how can we ignore it without damaging the system? Even though complex dynamical systems appear in physics, chemistry, biology, in economics, in political science, in business, almost everywhere, you don't learn much about it in most of these fields. I mean, people are ill-prepared to address those complexity challenges. And those are significant because complex systems are special. There are limits of predictability, there's an illusion of control, it's challenging to manage complexity. You may end up somewhere very different from where you want it to be. There can be deterministic chaos and butterfly effects. Plus, even though we're living in times where we have more data than ever and the best technology in human history, we shouldn't forget that data volume overtakes processing power, and that the share of dark data that will never be processed is increasing every day. So we really need to know what part of the data to process, otherwise we'll be misled. Also, complexity overtakes data volume. And so paradoxically, even though we have the best technology and more data than ever, we lose control as we try to control the world top down. So we need a new control paradigm, distributed control, and it brings us to self-organization as a principle that can be used to create that distributed control. And of course, we have networked systems now. Everything is networked, and so you often don't get the intended effect. You often get side effects, you get feedback effects, you get cascading effects. This destroys the effectiveness of centralized top-down control. And a change in perspective is needed. We typically pay attention to the nodes of the system, right? The people, the character, the properties. But if they start interacting with each other, and as these interactions become more and more strong, they will start behaving in ways we didn't expect, because they respond to other people. You know, this is what people complain about in terms of politicians, for example. But it will happen to everyone who's influenced by so many different interests. So the stronger the interactions get, the less important is it what the properties of the individuals are, the more important is the interaction naturally. And so we need to change the perspective from the components of the system to the interactions, which, however, we don't see, and that's why we don't pay attention to them. We have a wrong focus. Okay, and so we cannot control everything top down. We pointed that out back many years, and before us, also other people, I would say. And we were seen as turning the world upside down because we were, in a sense, arguing for bottom-up coordination rather than top-down control. So the point, however, is that complex systems tend to self-organize. And that is something that we can actually use in order to make the systems behave by themselves in a way that we'd like them to behave. So we need a paradigm shift from control to coordination. And it's not just a theoretical thing. Okay, I told you complex systems tend to self-organize. Establishing suitable interactions will produce desirable outcomes. So for that, we need mechanism design, and then we can basically make Adam Smith's invisible hand work, finally, after 300 years, using the Internet of Things, the data streams, for digitally assisted self-organization. And we have worked this out. So here, this newspaper article says, revolutionary idea, traffic controls the traffic lights. Perhaps it was too revolutionary, because here it says, Zurich is a threat, the plan would work too well. What to think about this? Now, this keynote talk I've given, it actually got a little prize. This has disappeared from the archive. Everything else is still there. So, misters. How have we done that? We have basically been inspired by self-organization of pedestrians at bottlenecks. We've said intersections of traffic flows are bottlenecks as well. Similar to Carlos Gershenson, we have worked on self-organizing principles for traffic flows in road networks. We have built a short-term anticipation, and then we have compared that actually with a benevolent dictator, what you would think is the best performing system. But it turns out that other regarding optimization can make the invisible hand work and outsmart top-down control attempts. I would even say other regarding coordination. And as it happens, this was implemented in the meantime. It was implemented by two people in particular, Stefan Lemmer, a previous PhD student who worked on that traffic light control with me, and Christian Heimgartner, who was running the traffic control center of Zurich for a long time. Those two established a company to basically put this system to the test. It was evaluated before and after, and the result was that everyone had to wait less, something that appears to be an impossibility, right? But it just means that green time was not wasted when it was not needed. The system was flexible and adaptive. It used opportunities in the traffic flows. Here you can see the big difference. So red means cars are waiting. There's a lot of waiting times for the previous green wave approach that is a state-of-the-art implementation. And below you see what came out based on self-organization, much better outcome, a little bit less regular, but who cares? In the meantime, we've also looked whether machine learning would basically improve the result without telling it the tricks of that self-organization, and it turns out no. So machine learning is not necessarily the one and only solution for every single problem of the world, which I guess everyone in this room would be ready to believe, but when you read the newspapers, it looks a bit different. So, informationally assisted self-organization works well. It's efficient and resilient to small perturbations. It can handle reasonably large deviations. It's compatible with freedom, democracy, and human rights. And so, why don't we do this? There is a solution for a time of big data. And so the question is how to make a democracy work. Been, in fact, working on this, inspired by swarm intelligence. And we've written this paper in Science, Nature, sorry. Angelis over there was a co-author, and also they've been winning actually the ETH Policy Challenge that the ISTP has been running with Empower Polis. I think there are more people in the room of that winning team, so congratulations. What is it all about? It's about bringing the best ideas of many minds together. This is really about collective intelligence, and it turns out that diversity wins, not the best. As teams of people would often outperform experts. In this case, when they combined the best solution, which however was not good enough to win the Netflix prize, when they combined it with worse solutions, that would not deteriorate the performance of the algorithm, but it made it a lot better. So combining different approaches, you, Alex, have also mentioned that with the ensemble approach. This is based on a collective intelligence concept. Basically, this is going to be much better than a benevolent dictator. Let's face it. And so how would that work? You would need to organize the process in certain phases. We know that there's also a madness of crowds if you don't pay attention to how things should be organized. And so here, phase one should be the independent exploration of possible solutions. People should not be influenced. Very difficult these days, given the search engines that manipulate you. Phase two then should be on information exchange. So only then you talk to each other. And in phase three, you would combine solutions with each other to come up with better integrated solutions. And then you have those collective intelligence solutions, and perhaps several of them, and you would have to vote. And now, interestingly enough, the most common voting method, yes, no, majority voting, is actually among the worst voting methods. There are various issues, including the tyranny of the majority, unfairness, and we've been making experiments with many different voting methods, and there are much better methods. We have also not only tested them in the laboratory, but we've applied them in the real world, in the city of Aarau, in a participatory budgeting project. Also, several people in the room have been contributing to this, and it was amazing to me because we've learned that we can be better than optimal, in the sense that better than optimizing a one-dimensional goal function. Because we can here satisfy many different interest groups and needs. We could upgrade democracy. We could have more projects realized. We could have more resourcefulness, talking about sustainability. We could have more participation, more inclusion, more transparency, more trust, more satisfaction, and more fairness. We've taken this idea of collective intelligence also to another level in the Future ICT 2.0 project. So inspired by this concept of maker spaces, open data, citizen science, and so on, we've started to do hackathons, several of them. There was huge interest among students. They were really very engaged. And it was impressive what they came up with, dozens of projects, I should say. And then we said, why not scale this up to the level of cities? And Gerhard Schmidt was also at some of the events that we've organized. And so we said, we have to basically give September 11 a different meaning, a different content, a different perspective. And we said, obviously, nations, states, United Nations, they're trying hard, and also global corporations are trying hard, but they have not solved humanity's big problems on time. And so we need additional approaches, complementary approach. We said, okay, do it yourself, do it together. City Olympics, that would be a promising approach. So the idea was to combine competition with cooperation. We have different competitive disciplines, reduce CO2 emissions, produce green energy, go to work by bike, and many other disciplines that you may care about. There would be a competition between cities and all the different stakeholders, politicians, business people, newspapers, scientists, citizens could participate in that competition, come up with better solutions. And then comes the cooperative part. The best projects would be selected, and they would be open source, Creative Commons. Everyone could take those solutions, combine them, develop them further of all the cities around the globe. So we would have network effects of that collective intelligence and locally adaptable solutions that would work. It would make quick progress. It would be a scalable approach. So the proposal was to think global, act local and diverse, not implement the same approach everywhere. Experiment, learn from each other, and help each other. And we were demonstrating that in the Climate City Cup. It was back in 2019. And a couple of countries were on board. And one of the later outcomes is actually the Routify app that has air quality suggestions even before Google Maps had it. Now, the overall approach is based on, say, the best of all the systems that we know, like competition as we know it from capitalism, collective intelligence as we know it from democracy, experimentation and selection from evolution culture, and AI, of course. There were quite a few organizations that were on board of that exercise, and then the concept of climate democracy came up rather than climate emergency. So we would have to do something, yes, but in a democratic way, and we could make progress democratically. And I was taken up, in fact, by a lot of initiatives. So American Cities Climate Challenge, for example, 70 millions in that first round. A Global Climate City Challenge, then One Planet City Challenge, City Challenge 2.0, City Challenge, even Zurich started a climate cup. And we've gone a step further and said, we need a new financial system. I mean, it was clear 2007-8 when the financial crisis came. Question was, how would it have to look like? And the idea was, there's a system that we can learn from, which is nature. Nature is a circular system. Interesting enough, it solves the problem very differently from what we're trying to do. It's not accumulating all the data of the entire world in one place and then trying to come up with an optimal solution and then imposes that on the entire world with more or less totalitarian control approach. Rather, nature is based on feedback loops, many feedback loops, local feedback loops, and after some time, there's forgetting. There is no data being stored in one place forever. It's a cybernetic approach, but a different one. And so we said, yeah, let's learn from that nature-based approach. How to turn wasteful supply chains into a circular economy. Of course, Internet of Things could be used. I can measure all those externalities that we want to minimize, CO2, heat, noise, and so on. And so basically, we would need incentive systems that increases positive externalities and reduces negative ones and ensures fair compensation. So we have invented a combination of money with measurement processes and said we need different kinds of money to create different kinds of feedback loops, different kinds of incentive systems that would allow people, companies to make local improvements in response to what happens around them. And so as everyone improves in response to everyone else, there is a co-evolutionary process that would lead us to a circular and sharing economy based on those newly induced forces in the market. And the most important point is to get away from a utilitarian approach, a one-dimensional optimization approach. We want not just maximum profit or maximum lifespan. We want to have prosperity, we want to have health, we want to have a good environment, we want to have education, we want to have culture. There's so many things we care about. But you cannot reach that by optimizing a one-dimensional wall function. You want to improve on many dimensions simultaneously through a co-evolutionary process. And here is the difference. This is a typical supply chain today. This is made for control, perfect control, more or less, right? Now, look at what our body does. Our body also contains supply chains. It looks totally different. It looks like this. And hey, it has cycles in it, you know. Nature figured it out. But the point is, if you have cycles, then A influences B, and B influences A. So who's in control? If you want to have cycles, you have to give up on control. You need to let things happen in a bottom-up way, and co-evolution does it. So I think we can learn from nature. We can learn how to boost symbiosis in the systems that matter to us. And in this way, also address the biggest problem that we have on Earth, which is the sustainability problem. Lack of sustainability means nothing else than if you don't fix that soon, a lot of people will die early. And this is the reason why people have been talking so much about the trolley problem. It was not just about automated cars. No, it was really about fixing that sustainability problem. Then came the so-called moral machine experiment, you know, whom to die if somebody has to die. And then in November 2019, that was before the first reports came out about Corona, 11,000 scientists said Earth needs fewer people to beat the climate crisis. The MIT, for example, by the way, did not agree with that. So it's highly controversial. And we, in particular, have said at that time, you know, if we cannot be happy with either solution A or solution B, then we need to create a solution C. I mean, build a new socio-economic or techno-socio-economic system that would not require to kill people, that would use resources in a much better way. For example, establish that circular economy that would solve many problems. And I published that we need democracy 2.0 and capitalism 2.0 to survive, to solve those sustainability problems more effectively than a data-driven, AI-controlled, benevolent dictator approach. And that's the kind of response that we got. So a lot of mobbing, social media, not just concerning me, is really very hurting content, I should say. I've even taken legal action. Unfortunately, it was not very effective. And when this case was closed, basically, that was January 30. The COVID-19 was declared as a public health emergency of international concern. And what happened was human rights were restricted. Many of them, you can see a selection of them. But most importantly, perhaps the right to life somehow was restricted. Triage was being done to people. This was using data, personal data, to basically put people to death. So we had to write this article. We've written 3 or 4 newspaper articles. Death by algorithm was one of them. And we've published a scientific article about Triage 4.0, about technological selection and why we shouldn't do it, and that anyway it would not be compatible with the Constitution. And finally, it seemed to really have an impact also on the highest court in Germany. They have finally, even though they didn't want it in the beginning, taken a decision that would protect, among others, handicapped people a lot better, or other able people much better than before. Now, this is not the only thing that has happened. And most people perhaps are not aware that we are living in a different world. Because now we are living at a time of converging technologies. And so this is around keywords such as Society 5.0, planetary health, Internet of Bodies, digital ID, transhumanism. And it's hard to believe, I can tell you. I couldn't believe it myself. So I really ask you to do your own research, to get your own impression about it. But back in 2020, the World Economic Forum, for example, informed us the Internet of Bodies is here. And what is this about? Scientifically, it's called the Internet of Nanosthings, or of bio-nanosthings, and it's basically about distributing nanoparticles, tens of thousands of a millimeter, much smaller than the diameter of a hair, not visible to the eye, to distribute such particles in the body, or use those that are already there, to basically use physics principles to read out data from the body, like reflection. You don't need to chip people for this. It's just dump particles, the distribution of which in the body you can read out. I can use it for identification. You can make a digital ID. You can use it basically to read out health data. That means some companies are out there that know more about your health than your doctor and yourself. And of course, there's a huge interest in creating digital twins of people, because there's a multi-billion-dollar market related to this. But there's also, of course, the potential of power. Now, why should we be concerned about this? Because it's not just about making money. It's about gaining control over you, because you are not in control of your own digital twin. Somebody else is, and you don't even know. As I indicated before, this is in particular also interesting for military operations. There are articles about it. Of course, not everything is public, but we have to assume that influencing our thinking, feeling, and action does not stop at nudging. But there's a lot more advanced technology in use by now, which is a lot harder to understand and to defeat. And the question came up, basically, whether civilization would be replaced by militarization. Because those technologies are mostly in control of the military. So I was raising these questions. It was not very healthy for me, I should say. There was a slide scandal around one of my slides. Basic structure you can see over here. I was warning of inappropriate use of big data algorithms, basically warning of treating people as if they were things, which is undermining human dignity. And I raised a couple of issues that I was concerned about, which was citizen scores, digital God, in-body surveillance, neurocapitalism, transhumanism, and something like an animal farm society that could actually emerge if we don't pay attention and don't stop it and don't get control of it. So this was a very bad experience, I should say. You know, for example, in response to this tweet over there is an old tweet related to one of our scientific publications. Why love your neighbor as yourself is such a powerful principle and can improve the entire world for everyone. You fucking racist, go to hell. That was the response, you know, and these kind of responses. So that wasn't not the only one that happened. You're going to die. So I got death threats. What do you want on your tombstone? And all these kind of things that happened, and the legal system did not step in. The news barely stepped in. Politics didn't step in, really. But I do think we need to sort this out. We cannot just let it happen. It's clear that things have developed in a very concerning way. Technology seems to have, at least in parts, turned against us. And I've insisted, and I think you should do that too, that we get back control over our personal data and our own lives, and with this also our digital twins, in fact. And we managed to create some pressure, and in fact, by now there's some progress, I should say. The General Assembly of the United Nations has established that we would now have the same rights online and offline, which surprisingly enough seems to have not been the case for a long time, and I think everyone knows that it was not the case, right? The UNESCO has been paying attention to the issue of neural rights. They have created a document that was forwarded to the United Nations. The United Nations have taken decisions about it, so things have progressed. But they're not finally sorted out, I would say. Just yesterday, I believe, we had this speech, was basically challenging an AI regulation that 60 countries wanted to have. And so the question is, will it ever go forward or not? And that means, I think your activities are needed to make also those things happen that we hope to happen. I want to share with you a little experiment that I've made recently. So, you know, there's ChatGPT and all those generative AI tools. And sometimes when I've had the feeling we cannot make progress with the classical formats and approaches, like a scientific publication, a newspaper article, I've tried to resort to other kinds of formats. And I did that before, like with the science fiction / fiction I got an urgent warning to the world back in the year 2017. I'm not sure you know it. I have now made this experiment to create two new science fiction that you can address through this QR code if you like. These have been created together with ChatGPT. You won't know what was ChatGPT's ideas and what are mine. And I wonder, how much you like it or not, let me know. But for sure, what I'm trying to do here is to put some issues on the table that I believe we urgently need to talk about. All right, despite everything, I do think change is coming. And I think you can contribute to it, so I believe in you. I think there's no future we want to live in if we don't re-establish a proper science system with fair competition of ideas, or if we lose our democracy or informational self-determination or human dignity. I'd like to thank you all for your great commitment to science. Thank you. I'm really a lot more optimistic about the future because of what we are doing, what our community is doing, also what the administration is doing. Wholeheartedly thank you for your commitment. I think together we can save human rights, we can save human dignity and democracy. Let's keep working on creating a better future together. Let's restore our science system, let's improve our democracy, let's get back to the future. A co-created future, a better future, our future.